Leprosy Mission Australia is a not-for-profit organisation. We support work in India, Nepal, Timor-Leste, Thailand, Papua New Guinea, and also in Nigeria and Africa. That's sort of at the Australian level. We're also part of an international organisation which is really exciting. So we have 28 member countries. We have a separate international board that governs the whole organisation, and we've really worked hard to build links with that particular committee. So there's a flow of best practices out of the UK and the global scene around governance into our operations here in Australia. The Constitution is uploaded onto the website and has been for a number of years. But more importantly, it's been refreshed recently and it's been put into more modern language. So our latest review of the Constitution was triggered by a number of organisational changes that happened structurally a number of years ago. And when we went back as a board, we made a decision that we would review and have a look at the complete document. We realised that there was terminology in it that really referred to the old structure, to old roles within the business. And we felt for someone looking from the outside in, that was not a good way to go about running our business. So that very much then triggered the refreshing activity of the document. We are fortunate that we'd done a lot of work around sourcing the right people for our board. So we had a qualified lawyer that sits on the board who also gave us the guidance around the ACNC regulations and also gave us insights into the ACFID code as well. The board was involved all the way through. We had a subcommittee formed to actually work on it and put in their ideas. We actually went out to our National Council members, our broader membership, and asked them to contribute ideas and also to overview the work the board was doing. So in terms of transparency for external stakeholders, it was a really great exercise. And I think they were impressed too that they'd been engaged, because historically that probably wouldn't have occurred. But also that means that now our members can actually talk to others outside the organisation and talk about how we've tightened the governance standards around that document. The whole piece around the regulatory environment in Australia is quite complex. There are a large number of regulators, and we also have the added layers within the Leprosy Mission of the international board, as well as the other subcommittees we have to report to at international level. So there are multiple parties, a lot of people with different requirements around governance. Here in Australia, we've obviously got the ACNC, which is our primary regulator. We've got our requirements under the ACFID code. But we also have a number of state authorities, particularly given we're active in fundraising and we're a charity. So it was a real challenge to look at this complex landscape and work out what do we do. And we basically surveyed all of the regulator websites, contacted certain regulators who are very open at sharing information around what is better governance and how to protect the organisation around its licensing regime. And we brought all that work together into a draft document, which was then considered by the board. And what we now see is a register that actually sits on top of all of that activity, records all of the regulators that we're accountable to and the types of information we need to provide by when. And that is actually handled by someone who's been delegated as their specific duty to do that. It is a very important issue, particularly for a faith-based organisation that we are, and also involved in obviously government funding for some of our work as well. So there's an important perspective around that. We've worked hard on a policy for that. We have one in place here in Australia which defines clearly for those who are operating in projects and also in the field, as well as for the leadership of the organisation, the importance of the segregation of development funding and non-development funding in terms of how we go about our work. It is a challenge though, because we're coming from an informed perspective here in Australia, whereas the 6 countries we operate in aren't nearly as advanced in terms of their understanding about why that separation is important. So a lot of our field workers and our project leadership teams work with those local countries to try and influence and build policies within their own operations that cover that segmentation, if you like, but allow them to operate within their cultures. And so I suppose that's also part of our mission, is that we see taking sort of the standards that ACFID has developed and trying to share that knowledge across border and help strengthen the actual governance of the countries that we have projects that we're running. We invest into the leadership team within Timor-Leste. There's a very small team there, an important team, and the spiritual development of that team in terms of operating in that environment and encouraging them and also helping them do their jobs better is an important part of how we build capability into that country. So Australia sponsors an annual spiritual retreat for that team. They go away as a group and learn and grow together. But we're very clear and specific then, linking it back to Australia, to our donors. We very much call out and communicate that that is a non-development activity, and if people are donating here in Australia or contributing funds, they're very fully aware that those funds are going to a non-development activity. So we make it a very strong link from a communication point of view. We mainly look at that through going in and doing our annual assessments on the projects that we have in country. So we'll send qualified people out from here and they will step through different elements of governance of how those projects are operating in those countries, whether it be Nigeria or Timor-Leste or whatever. So the assurance we have is having that program staff member come back, do a report on the particular project, and then talk about the separation and what training has taken place in the field around development and non-development activities. It becomes an issue, then it's raised through the annual country learning workshops, or it's raised by those field workers that come back and say, right, well, we've got an education and training issue here around the separation. What can we do about it? And we go back in and intervene then and do that coaching and training around that side. But given we're part of a DFAT accreditation process as well, there's some very strong guidance around how to keep that separation. And so we make sure that we're also focused on the DFAT requirements in terms of the nearly $1 million we have in an allocated dollar sense, that we need to be good governance demonstrators. We have introduced across the 6 countries where we have projects an anonymous hotline, if you like. So apart from the normal escalation process through either TLMA processes or through ACFID itself, the team has developed this hotline concept that can be rung by people that may have an express desire to say they're unhappy with the way we're running a project, haven't been happy with behaviours, and then we can escalate that and handle that appropriately through those channels. And it's done by the partners within country. So there's very good understanding and there's not language barriers, and the issues can be interpreted within the cultures in which they occur as well, which is really important. In terms of the complaints, there is an ability to analyse why they're occurring and how they're occurring and what frequency. There are people allocated to following that through and closing that issue off. And if the board believes it's a more systemic issue, then it obviously gets an airing at the main board meeting and is discussed at that level. But we do that regularly, looking at the complaints register as a board, and obviously we hold the leadership team accountable for that. So the CEO has to present to that. We'll probably see an increase in complaints coming through to me, which is a healthy thing, because you're being transparent and you've got that communication process working effectively from in-country back to what we're doing here in Australia to the policymakers. So there's a project evaluation process that occurs across all our major projects. That feedback also comes up through our annual country learning workshops as well in terms of feedback. So there's a variety of different mechanisms that operate at country level that flow the information back to us here. We then capture that at senior leadership team level in a register. That register is then made available to the HR and Governance Committee on a regular basis for review. So even though we are spread across a number of different countries, that is quite a manageable issue for us. That's also driven by the ACFID Code of Conduct in the sense that we have subgroups formed who are subject matter experts. So it could be around finance or risk, could be around our project portfolio. We choose directors that have strengths in those areas, and then we generally put all the work into those committees and then just escalate up for approval by the high-level board. So a subcommittee structure is really important to managing more effectively the implementation of governance, and then having an overseeing role, because you can't do it all as a small group. It's a lot better to delegate sometimes.